Thanks for joining me. I'm Dave Elliott. We start with improving our state roads, highways, and bridges. The Mississippi Department of Transportation is lobbying the legislature for more creative funding. Joining us now, MDOT Executive Director Brad White. Director White, first time I believe in the studio on the show.
Yes,
we
sir.
appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
Okay, I just want to tell everybody it's 2,800 miles from New York to Los Angeles. Now, why would I tell you that? MDOT is responsible for nearly 30,000 highway miles and about 6,000 bridges and structures. That's how big transportation is.
The taxpayers have an investment of about $66 billion in roads and bridges.
You know, I know it's probably a rather complicated formula when it comes to the different streams of revenue, but just pick a number. What would be MDOT's operating annual budget?
We operate on about $1.5 billion now, and traditionally for the last several years it was around $1.2 billion. But you can imagine with a $66 billion asset that you're having to maintain and try to rehabilitate and keep ahead of the curve, then that's before you get into a list of projects worth about $9 billion that need to be built out to add efficiency and move traffic more efficiently. That's not as much money as it may sound originally.
Now, you and I were talking a little bit, the difference between, you have kind of two buckets. You have this maintenance responsibility, but at the same time, and you pointed out on the coast, we can really relate to this, there's also a need for planning for the future. New projects,
right.
Expanding the interstate, I-10 for instance. So how difficult is it to balance those two responsibilities?
Well, it's extremely difficult. I mean, we run a federal program. People think of us as a state agency, but we're a state agency that manages a federal program. A lot of our funds are federal money, but it's done through a reimbursement type of situation where we spend state funds first. When the federal government is able to ascertain that we've done everything according to their standards and followed their regulation, they reimburse us to the 80 or 90%, whichever, depending on the project it is. So having a state revenue stream that's able to, first of all, maximize the use of federal dollars, but at the same time keep programs like that moving is of most importance.
Is there a requirement for matching dollars when it comes to a lot of things done with the Department of Transportation?
All of our stuff is.
Everything is kind of matching money.
That's correct.
Okay, so we had this $1 trillion infrastructure bill, speaking of federal dollars, back in 2021. I believe, and correct me if I'm wrong, Mississippi's share of that is about $1.2 billion. Have we seen any of that?
Well, now the portion of the IIJA that was important to MDOT was the reauthorization of Federal Highway Administration, which happens every 5 years. And that was actually about $3.5 billion that we would receive over that 5-year period of time that Congress had set aside. That is what the Federal Highway Administration uses with their partners in the states to try to implement their program. So with that, we would have to come up with a match in order to continue drawing down the federal money to build out our projects, and whether that be maintenance or capacity.
Now, the big four when it comes to the state budget, you have, of course, education, transportation, corrections, and Medicaid, I would say, right? Those are the big four here in the state. Are lawmakers receptive, do you feel, right now, to hear MDOT's story?
I do, because every one of them have their own list of priorities from their district where there's a transportation need. So I do think that they're receptive to what we're saying, and we're not asking for any specific amount of money as much as relooking at the model that we're funded by. Traditionally, we've always been funded by fuel tax, but I think as vehicles, we have the growth of electric vehicles, you have growth of hybrid vehicles, you have more efficient fuel-operated vehicles. The fuel tax is just not going to be sustainable in my mind, and I think we need a more diversified approach, and I think there's ways of doing that without raising taxes.
Raising taxes. Mississippi's state tax, 18 cents. That's on the low end nationally. If you look, I think Alabama's 26 cents or something, about 20 cents. Louisiana, Florida, 36 cents or something. So we're low compared to the rest of the states.
Only Alaska has a lower rate than we do.
Yeah, then look at California and Pennsylvania, 58 cents or whatever.
Right.
Anyway, I digress. 4 years ago, maybe, when gasoline was $1.69 a gallon and before raging inflation set in, people were actually talking a little bit about considering raising the gas tax in Mississippi. I'm not advocating it, but what do you think about that?
Well, I mean, I think that's an option, but I don't think it's sustainable. I do think that we need to look at a more diversified model. I think there's ways, whether it be through the use tax, whether it be through gaming revenue. There are other places in the budget that diversions could be set up that collectively would be able to maybe more manageably address the funding deficit that we have and allow us to run our program the way we'd like. I mean, we would like to look out 20 years and build planning for the future rather than trying to react to the traffic problems we have now. And I think in order to do that successfully in the long haul, we're going to need a more diversified streams of revenue.
You know, I'm glad you said that, because I would like to point out to viewers, when you talk about these big billion-dollar, $700 million projects, you do have to look 20 years out. You have to look at growth, projection, trends. You have to look at all of these things. I mean, you're not building for today on some of these big projects.
That's right. That's exactly right. But what we don't want to do is, first of all, our first goal is to protect the investment the taxpayers have. So we're required federally to hit certain metrics on the maintenance of our system. And if the funding becomes an issue, then that means we're going to have to pull away from projects like this where we're planning for the future in order just to try to stay ahead of the game in the maintenance of our existing system. And that's what leads us to situations where you run into traffic congestion and where you run into a 2-lane highway that needs to be a 4-lane or a 4-lane that needs to be a 6-lane. So if funding continues to be an issue, we're going to have to abandon that program again in order to take care of our maintenance.
I want to go back to, you mentioned the gaming revenue. Is that a very popular idea, taking some of the game? And since the coast produces most of that gaming revenue, I think it would be fair if a lot of that transportation money came back to the coast.
Well, absolutely. Well, right now, the 2 streams of revenue the state has that have been connected to infrastructure are use tax and gaming revenue. We're paying off bonds now with gaming revenue that was spent years ago to try to help build out bridges and things like that. So I think that putting that into our budget would allow us to address some of the needs that are here on the coast, where you have a lot of the congestion, you have a growth in population, and you have economic development and all of those things.
Okay, and I want to talk about something that you and I also were talking about. There's a thing called design build. The 2 best examples of design build that people can relate to on the coast: 2005 after Katrina, St. Louis Bay Bridge taken out, Biloxi Bay Bridge taken out. Basically the rules, if you will, were waived. It was design build, and those bridges were built like that. It was a miracle. You want that to be reformed. You want to see more of that.
We want to expand it. It's just another tool in our toolbox, and it's a way that we could deliver our product to the taxpayers, I think, more efficiently, both from a time standpoint and also from a cost standpoint. Because I believe if we're able to expand the use of design build to where we're bringing contractors and designers and all of these people together
as the project's being done,
on the front end, you're able to mitigate a lot of the damages that you may get into in a project. And by virtue of getting around that, I think we could deliver a better product with less money and shorter time period.
Well, you get that thing on the ballot, and I'll vote for it. I'll vote.
Well, it's passed the House of Representatives unanimously, and I expect it to sail through the Senate.
Yeah,
so I think we're going to have good luck with that.
I think we have to reform that because I love that. What about the difficulty with the costs and the supply chain issues right now? Asphalt, concrete, steel, just through the roof.
Well, that is our main problem. We've got the same amount of revenue going in to the rehabilitation of our system, but it's not buying as much asphalt. So the number of projects that we're getting to the street are fewer. And so that's another reason that we've got to modify the way that we fund transportation here, because this is a core function of government, and we can't fall behind in maintaining our current investment. But the money just doesn't go as far.
Okay, I have 20 seconds left, so I need kind of a yes or no answer here. Charles Busby, the Transportation Commissioner, and former Chief Engineer Kelly Castleberry both said on this show they envision 3 lanes from state line to state line on I-10. Do you think that's possible in the future?
I do. I think we're working toward trying to advance all of that system, but it's going to take the revenue stream in order to do it.
All righty. Brad White, Executive Director of MDOT. Thanks so much for all the valuable information, and thanks so much for being with us on the coast.
Thank you.